Pondering God, Chapter 80, What Happened to the Church, Part 2. In an earlier post titled, What Happened to the Church, I wondered aloud what has happened to the church's influence, specifically in America. My conclusion from that piece was that the church has forgotten who we are, fallen sinners, and that instead of humbly relating to the rest of the world, we've proudly separated ourselves from them. We've forgotten where we came from, never a healthy mindset. In this piece, I want to add to my thoughts and look at the same question again. What happened to the church? Attending the local church regularly for the past 30-plus years, I have seen a change in emphasis in what evangelism looks like. When I first became a follower of Christ, it was important to share the good news and to witness to others about your relationship with Jesus. I admit, it was a little unnerving to approach a total stranger and share the intimate details of your life in Christ. And yet, isn't that what the good news is? Isn't the good news a story of Jesus and his redemption? The good news that a sinner doesn't have to live and die in that condition and end up in hell, separated from God for eternity. Has the message changed? Today, the flock has a new mission. From an early age, kids are taught to invite people to church. Come to our church, it's cool. In fact, churches are all competing to see who can be the coolest. If your church doesn't have giant flat-screen television monitors surrounding a huge stage, the envy of any high school drama teacher, then your church isn't cool. And on that stage, it's important to feature professional cast of singers and entertainers, beautiful people all, with perpetual smiles plastered on their faces, who lead the audience in worship. The sound emanating from the stage is the envy of all garage bands everywhere, and the volume is such that those in the audience who would otherwise be off-key and a nuisance are now drowned out. In fact, half the audience doesn't even sing anymore, content to listen to the act on stage, behaving like those at a rock concert. And every cool church must have a coffee bar, no tip necessary for the baristas. That's already covered in your offering, which is now done with a credit card at kiosks scattered throughout the 10-acre building. The odd thing about this new evangelism and the cool church is that growth in membership is stagnant. Not quite the results from 2,000 years ago, as described in Acts chapter 2, verse 47. And the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. In reading the accounts of the early church in Acts, I don't see it mentioned anywhere that the followers of Jesus were inviting people to church. Maybe because they didn't have a church, but instead met in one another's homes. What were they doing? That God was adding to their number day by day. Reading the words of Peter, James, John, Paul, and Stephen, it looks like they were preaching the good news, as they were instructed by the Lord. They preached Jesus. They gave personal testimonies as to how Jesus had saved and changed their lives. Is that message not good enough today? Is that message just not cool enough? You don't have to go back to the book of Acts to find out. Just look at China. In 1970, it was estimated there were 3 million Christians in China. 40 years later, the estimate is 130 million. The growth has been explosive. What have the Chinese done to accomplish such growth? Build cool churches? Have well-staffed coffee bars and a rockin' band on Sunday mornings? How could that phenomenal growth happen in a communist country where believing in Jesus is a crime and those who do so will often suffer persecution and death? The truth is, it's all about what God is doing. He's honoring the Chinese Christians, not because they have cool churches, but because they are following Jesus' command. They don't invite people to have a relationship with a building or an organization. They invite people to have a relationship with Jesus. Paul had this to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. For indeed, Jews ask for signs, and Greeks search for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, to Jews a stumbling block, and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. The head of the World Council of Churches, Matthew's George Chunakra, said that God is using the foolish to shame the wise. He said, while Christianity is dying in the West, God is bringing a spiritual awakening in third world countries like India and China. If the church in America wants to impact the culture like it did in the early days, and like it's doing in China, the followers of Christ need to stop inviting people to a relationship with an organization and instead offer them Jesus. The organization will not save you. We need to stop trying to be cool and stop trying to compete with the world as an alternative entertainment. We need to be comfortable with being foolish. We need to share the good news. We need to preach Christ crucified. What will make a difference? If the lost in America would see a congregation of people who have been transformed because of their relationship with Jesus, then I believe that God would once again add to their number day by day those who are being saved. I have one final thought. If you invite someone to church and they ask why, what will be your response?